Hello, viewers. Welcome to this week. My name is Adebiyi Jelili Adegboyega, otherwise known as Ghana. I'm your host for today's edition of This Week. It's great to be with you again, and we're happy that you are here to spend time with us live and after the fact. This week is a bi-weekly show on Saturdays at 2 p.m. UTC, 3 p.m. West African time, 4 p.m. Central African time, and 5 p.m. Eastern African time. We discuss about everything, ranging from politics to serious and comical from across the continent. We welcome you to engage with us in the comments or at theleadersofafrica.org/live. Join our Discuss community and of course, hit that subscribe button. To subscribe to the Leaders of Africa on YouTube, Ekabo, which means welcome in Yoruba. Hi guys, how are you doing today?
Good.
Oh, well, thank you.
Doing good.
That's good to know.
Ghana, I must say, I really like your background.
Oh, thanks so much for that. That's one of the African fabric that got sent to me by a very good friend. I get to receive some of this gift from time to time. Yeah, I really appreciate it too. Thanks so much for that. I appreciate it. Eva, how are you doing today? I can see you smiling a lot. Is there a good news for us from you?
Yeah, it's been a good week.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
Oh, that's good. Awesome. Awesome. And Violet, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you, Ghana.
I'm
How are you
glad to know
doing?
that. I'm glad to know that. Today's this week is going to be a very interesting one. And Peter, let's get started with you. What's on your mind for the week?
Yeah, so what's on my mind is something that is more of a developing story than something that necessarily happened, out of the blue, so to speak. And that's this issue of the corruption investigation and potential legal proceedings against the former president of South Africa, that is Jacob Zuma. And so many of you have heard or know who Jacob Zuma is. Well, he was the immediate past president who was replaced in the middle of their term. And that's not something that's new in the case of South Africa. That's happened with the former President Mbeki some years ago. But he was the party changed their leadership in the middle of his term. And part of the reason why they changed his leadership in the middle part of his term was that they were concerned with some of the baggage that President Zuma had that he was carrying. And that was mainly the baggage of corruption, allegations of corruption, as well as some judgments of courts, as well as parts of the government that investigate corruption, the response of some of those organs, right? And some famous stories had come out over the years. One was the use of state resources to build a very large swimming pool, which President Zuma claimed was to be a security measure, right? So in case your house is literally on fire, you can have some water nearby to put it out. So that was one of the more outrageous claims, as well as the whole story around Gupta-gate and his relationship with the Gupta family, both in terms of using state resources to ferry themselves to a wedding, as well as the business and other relationships that were present. And so right now in the country of South Africa, they're going through a process of inquiry that's looking into this issue of what they call in South Africa state capture. So that comes from a report that one of their public prosecutors released. And so now Jacob Zuma, facing this inquiry, the Zondo inquiry, is now refusing to testify in front of that inquiry. And so the judge most recently in the past couple of days said that he is in contempt of court and must appear to answer to some of these allegations, which he claims are bogus and are fraudulent, are made up, politically motivated. And so it's really a standoff right now between the court court and Jacob Zuma. But as well, it's also a standoff between the Secretary General of the African National Congress, who is also mixed up in the corruption scandal and who has backed Jacob Zuma as well. So that leads to sort of an internal party sort of conversation within the African National Congress, or ANC, as well. So it's a continuing story with a really important sort of piece that's happened in the last couple of days.
Yeah, that's interesting to know. And Jacob Zuma has always been in the story. Violet, it seems you want to chime in there. Do you have something to talk about Jacob Zuma? Or?
Oh, well, for starters, I do find as much as it's sad, I still find it quite hilarious. I mean, and he seems to be giving the classic African president response to corruption allegations and inquiries of, oh, this is a witch hunt, this is politically motivated. And I'm just wondering about the implications of convicting a former president. I know that something like that has been going on in the United States, and something that kept coming up was the kind of precedent that it would set and whether it was constitutional and so many things along those lines. And I'm trying to think about it and wondering what the implications might be for South Africa going forward, and even for the rest of Africa, because it could set a precedent. I'm wondering what kind of precedent it would set and how that might affect the whole region going forward. I haven't thought about it, but it just came to me.
Yeah,
that was a very thoughtful comment.
But the situation with Jacob Zuma has been going on for a very long time. As you all know, as Peter mentioned, he was president for 9 years. And through those 9 years, it was scandal after scandal about the house. It was even more than just the pool. It was a whole mansion that he built for himself in his home village. And that was it was a big issue. But I think part of the reason why there are issues with this particular court case is that he claimed that the judge who's presiding over the case, Zondo, is biased against him. Mm-hmm. So that is one of his arguments. That's actually one of the reasons why he didn't show up in court. So I'm wondering if they were to replace the judge or create a commission that's impartial, will that maybe change his mind? Will he, comply with the process? I don't know.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because I did read somewhere, and I'm not sure if it was Zuma during his term or someone else who had asked the judge to step down, and the judge said, oh no, I am rightfully doing my job and I'm not going to step down. And I found that quite interesting, and then the fact that Zuma supporters are saying that they will keep him in office, and they're going as far as to dress in military fatigues. Of course, what kind of message that sends out, and wondering really how divisive that might be for the country, even if they were to switch judges. If he does have a combative support base, what that might mean.
Yeah, I don't see, the judge stepping down. It's going to be a long process, and also the supporters. He has a large base of supporters, so this is going to be very interesting to see how it play out. And we know South Africa has a lot of experience with protests, and they're good at organizing that. And so it will be very interesting to watch this case.
Yeah, one quick point on that, Gloria. You're absolutely right. He has a lot of support. Despite all of this story, despite this trickle of information, despite their independent public protector issuing that report on state capture, which is the roots of this investigation, despite all of that information and coverage in the media and in other places, people will still go to bat for him, support him at all costs. And they also believe his narrative, right? That all of this sort of independent prosecutors and others who have investigated him are all doing this because it's politically motivated. They're trying to get at him, or, let's go to sort of the roots of that support, that they're going after the Zulu peoples within the ANC coalition, right? Which he sort of purports to represent, and where a lot of his core support is present, right? So there's also that aspect that's under the surface that's going on as well.
I appreciate all the conversation points, and particularly the point on the judge, presiding judge over this issue. So I like us to know, what I'd like to know from us, and I'm very sure our viewers like to know this as well, is about the popularity of the judge or the salience of the issues being objections being raised by Zuma. Because if Zuma is making a case that it's very possible that the judge is likely to be biased against him for certain and so reason, and if the judge is aware that he has a very huge followership among South Africans, so where do we actually strike a balance here between a judge that he knows that, it's popularly accepted by the people, and Zuma that is making a case of likelihood of the judge being biased against him? So where should, I like to know our opinion about this, that does Zuma deserve to be heard out? Will it be a good thing for the judge to recuse himself in this particular case, and for another judge who is going to do justice to the case based on the consideration of Zuma, or based on the issues raised by Zuma, be put in place? So what are our thoughts on this? Eva, let's start today.
Okay, I don't think the judge should recuse himself, because Zuma is saying that the judge is being biased against him, and mostly that is a political tactic, or that is a tactic he's using to buy himself some time.
Yeah.
And that is what every experienced politician does. Anytime there is a case against him, he raises unsubstantial allegations to try to buy himself time to put his evidence and stuff together. So number one, I don't think the judge should recuse himself. The only way the judge can recuse himself is when he has conflict of interest, or he's also implicated in the case. But if that has not been stated, then I don't think the judge should just excuse himself and say that, no, I can handle the case. What a judge says is that he invited him, come and let's ask you questions. So if Zuma believed that he's innocent, I don't think that he should give the excuse of the judge being biased against him. He should just go and prove himself. Because in the law of court, you are given opportunity to make your case. Let us hear your side of the case. Your lawyers are there, but we also want to hear from you. There are witnesses, there are people that have raised allegations against you. So you definitely have to be present and talk about and talk your case out. It's also the fact that Zuma has a lot of support base. I think he's also using that as a bait to buy himself time, as a bait to point fingers to the political to the judiciary system and also the political structure, to say that they have all turned against him because he is the good guy. You get it? So he's selling this narrative to his base, because he knows that if the system try to get hold of him, his base will rise up and fight on his behalf. And that is what a lot of politicians do, you know. And this case has been going on forever. So I believe that he has the lawyers, and if he think that he's innocent, he thinks that they are making substantial allegations against him, and they are not true, he should bring his document. The court will also bring their document. And at the end of the day, if he has the right story, then I think that they will let him go. So for me, what he's saying, I think, is just an excuse.
Yeah, so just to emphasize one critical point about how Justice Raymond Zondo got into this position, he was appointed by the Chief Justice of their court, their apex court, their Chief Justice. So there is a process of appointment, and in South Africa, institutions are a bit more independent than perhaps in other places. So there is that independence that is there, and that allows, say, your public protector to investigate even the president, right? I think that's something that we have to acknowledge here, is that the roots of a lot of this investigation came from an independent prosecutor's office within the government, which we would say that's a great thing, right? That's an independent authority that's able to go after the highest figure in the land. So that's how Raymond Zondo or Justice Raymond Zondo got into this position. And just to reiterate, this process has been going on. The commission itself has been sort of working its way through things since 2018, the beginning of 2018. And obviously before that, there were other investigations that were taking place. So I agree with what Eva's feeling is on this. I don't think the judge has any sort of reason to recuse himself from this commission. And I think a lot of this on the part of President Zuma is just to undermine the legitimacy of independent institutions, right? And that's the broader concern that a lot of South Africans that are watching their courts, are watching their investigative arms are concerned about, is they're losing that independence.
So, Violet, I'm wondering, what is your thoughts on this? Is it very possible that Jacob Zuma has learned something from a very similar event in the United States, where the president refused to appear before, such a panel, a very similar panel? Could it be that that could be a motivating factor why he has decided to go this route? Because it may be that it's a case of influence. I'd like to know your thoughts, Violet, and then Glory on this.
Ghana, so as a disclaimer, first of all, I wouldn't presume to know the mind of Jacob Zuma and what his thoughts are, but I would actually think that there is influence because, well, we will not deny that the United States does have a very huge influence on how most of the world plays out, especially when it comes to democracy and all the political intricacies. And yes, I do think he has picked a leaf and looked at how well Trump and this whole second impeachment process, even the first one, played out, and how somehow partisan politics did play a very big role, even way above some of the salient issues that, we could all see for us. And so when we get back to the issue of South Africa, I mean, the ANC itself right now as the ruling party does have quite a lot of power, but then we also know there are so many other elements within the ANC party who have concentrated pockets of power. And depending on Zuma's influence, he does have a lot of influence right now, just like Donald Trump did have a lot of influence even after he stopped being president of the United States. So I do see him wielding that influence to create kind of upset within the party that, could threaten to destabilize everything. And I do think that at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, most of the time politicians tend to think about the greater good and might end up sacrificing things like prosecuting an ex-president or, things like that for what they call the greater good, which would be the stability of the country in this case. So when we see those created pockets of power within the ANC getting interested and even probably threatening the stability of the party if this goes ahead. And then we see Zuma's supporters on the ground also trying to promise an insurrection if, like this continue along the lines, we might find that it might continue for political theater, just please the public, but nothing tangible might come out of it, or it might even disappear and win out. So I wouldn't really be surprised if political pressure eventually outweighs the legal pressure, if I could call it that.
One thing that I have realized is that in our countries, on the continent in Africa, most of the time when a leader does something wrong and there is corruption allegations against them, the first thing we do is to cause them to leave office, resign, or suspend them or something like that, without taking them through the proper procedure for them to be indicted, to be proven guilty, to pay for it. So we have this situation where we have like exceptions in the law, where if you're a former leader or you're a leader that has been caught in a scandal, you are just suspended from your office, or the president asks you to leave or you resign, and the case about you is dead. No, nobody is above the law. That is what we have to start thinking. Nobody is above the law. When a leader is involved in corrupt scandal, we should go after them. We should find out the truth. If they are truly guilty, they should face the consequences. We shouldn't come with a situation where, oh, because they leave office, the case is dead. No. So I like what South Africa is going, that they are going after their former leader to show him that he's not above the law, and they have to go through the right procedures to prove that he's guilty, right? Guilty before the court, and he has to come and prove himself innocent. And if he prove himself innocent and the right procedures are observed, then they will know that yes, indeed, the rule of law has worked and nobody's above the law. So I feel like this is the time that we have to go after leaders that come into power and just amass wealth without thinking about the average person. It's happening. That is where we lose so much money on the continent, because people come into power, they have target of how much money they want to make. And then when they make that money, they leave office and they leave our coffers dry, and another person, leadership will take over, and the same thing goes on. So when do we stop? We stop those things when we go after them and reclaim the things that belong to the states.
Yeah,
I wanted to add, Ghana, because you previously asked a question. I would say, adding to what Violet just said and what Eva just said right now, Jacob Zuma will be Jacob Zuma. If you've been following him through his presidency, he has faced public and legal scrutiny so many times before, and he comes back with the most ridiculous explanations and excuses for his behavior. So this is not even different from what he's doing now, asking the judge to step down. All of this, it's really just a distraction. As you said, Eva, if you are innocent, come before the court, bring your argument, bring your evidence, and that's how it should play out.
I mean, you mentioned something that Jacob Zuma will be Jacob Zuma. Could you go a little bit into that? Because I'm sure a lot of our viewers would like to know your thought about who is Jacob Zuma, and why do you think that Jacob Zuma will be Jacob Zuma?
I won't claim to know the person really, to be honest, like Violet just said, but I lived in South Africa during his presidency. That's how I know. This was story after story and story after story. And sometimes he would not even take these allegations seriously. It would joke about it and just move on as if it's nothing. But these are serious issues that are affecting the country. And so these commissions should be allowed to carry out their work.
Yeah.
Yeah, to close this out, Peter, your final thought on this issue. And because democracy, there's been a lot of issue of abuses, even in the United States, when it comes to democracy. And so what is your thought about what needs to change in the democracy itself, so that this issue of allegations of corruptions being leveled against leaders across different parts of work in democratic government, can be reduced to the barest minimum? Particularly from the campaign point of view, politicians spend millions of money to get into offices. And in places like Africa, where citizens don't fund political parties, the politicians need to go out of their way to get this money to fund themselves. And do you think that that is not the thing that is coming in the way of service? When I go to bank to borrow money just because I want to become the president and I need to pay this loan back, and the salary that I'm earning at the president is not sufficient, is that not suggesting that something needs to change about democracy, Peter? Your last take on this.
Well, I would say on that point, I think that's a broad point on campaign finance. I think when we look the world over, countries struggle with this issue of campaign finance, and the facts are that wealthy people have an immediate path to office, and that's not necessarily germane to one country or another. That's a common concern, right? And the concern has to do with our understanding of private property and our voice, right? Is my money part of an extension of my voice? Therefore, I should be able to use it. Now, in South Africa and other countries, there are some restrictions. I'm not so familiar of the particulars of campaign finance in South Africa. I know that they do have media laws that allow for sort of more equitable coverage, or at least proportional coverage to your sort of political power, to ensure that there are a broader array of voices that are heard, at least in public media. I think that's important. But I think that leaving those campaign finance issues aside, I think the broader point for South Africa, which I think is good and should be a model taken elsewhere, is the importance of transparency, to holding leaders accountable, to perhaps campaign finance as well, and transparency backed up by independent institutions, right? And ensuring that court systems are independent of those who are in political power, and ensuring that prosecutorial and investigative powers, as well as other powers to get information about what happened, is also very key. So I think that's a good starting place for us to have some of those conversations.
I mean, thank you so much for that. And I think it's been a very beautiful conversation on this issue of Jacob Zuma. It's been a recurring issue, a recurring decima in the news. And viewers, be rest assured that in subsequent edition of this week, we are going to come back to the issue of Jacob Zuma, because it's about strengthening of institutions in Africa. And this may be a case in point that will set the precedence for what needs to change in the democratic space on the continent in Africa. Yeah, so we'll be moving next to Gloria, to know what has been on your mind over the last 2 weeks. And before we do, I'd like to ask you this question for the benefits of
the news quiz.
Yeah, the news quiz, changing the tradition a little bit today. So there is this highly respected woman. She's been a leader. She's worked with different international organizations in the past. And she applied to be the DG of the World Trade Organization. And there was a lot of controversy surrounding her candidature. And in particular, the last administration in the United States refused to accept her candidature, despite the fact that she picked up United American citizenship, thinking that was going to influence their decision to support her. So interestingly, just last week, she was made the DG of the organization. Gloria, who is this notable and highly regarded personality?
Let me say it was actually this week, if I'm not mistaken. And this amazing woman is Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. I am so happy for her. She's a powerful woman, achieved a lot, and this is like a proud moment for Africa.
Yeah, it's a proud moment, and a lot has been written about her. And hopefully, we look forward to radical changes at World Trade Organization during her time. And from this, we are going to transition to what has been on your mind this week, Gloria.
Great. Yeah, in fact, this story ties in a little bit into what we just talked about, corruption. And so this takes us to West Africa, in Nigeria, where the president must have been this week, if I'm not mistaken, appointed a new head of the EFCC. EFCC is the Economic Financial Crimes Commission, which is the Nigerian agency in charge of fighting corruption. And so since President Buhari came into power, he first selected the first leader. That was in 2016, where he appointed somebody who was an acting lead of the agency. He was never confirmed by the Senate, because from the time that he was selected by the president, there were already some allegations of wrongdoing, of fraud. And so they eventually launched a panel of investigators to look into Ibrahim Magu, look into some of the allegations that were presented against him. And so last year, towards the end of the year, in November, the panel finalized that investigation and they submitted the findings to the president. And the president decided to remove Ibrahim from that position. And now he has appointed a new person. His name is AbdulRasheed Bawa. He's 40 years old, young man, to lead the commission. And so right now he needs to go through a process of confirmation through the Senate before he can leave the agency. And one thing to note about AbdulRasheed is that he will be the first leader of the EFCC who did not come from a police background. Previous leaders have had police trainings except him, but he's been working with this agency for the past 15 years.
Yeah, I'd like to know your thought on this, Hiva. What do you think about the appointment of AbdulRasheed Bawa, a young man in his 40s, to head the Economic and Financial Crime Commission in Nigeria? Do you consider it to be a positive development, more so that you have been one of the strongest voices for use as into such positions in Africa?
Yeah, I think he will be fine. But, when it comes to EFCC in Nigeria, it's a complicated position. That, as Violet said, that this one was just recently appointed. Most of the people that has been appointed in the past, in the course of their work, they find themselves implicated in the same issues that they are fighting against. So I believe that him coming into power or him being appointed into this position, he has to be true to himself. He's there to fight against corruption, and he should just be there, because people will try to implicate him by trying to bribe him to drop certain allegations against them. And that is when, if he implicates himself, or if he find himself, conniving with them and taking bribes, then they will use it against him. So he has to stay true to the cause. He has to be transparent about every case. If he's going after big men, he has to be transparent what he's investigating them for. He has to have a website where people can have access to the information. If there is a need for daily briefing on what is going on in their department, if they are going after someone, they should give daily briefing to the citizens for them to know that this is what is going on. I think he using some of these tools, being transparent to being accountable to the people, will actually help him to succeed in his job, because this EFCC is very complicated, because you are not going after people that are stealing, people that are having implicated or indicted in corruption cases with small amount of money, like say $50,000 US. No, you are going after people that have taken 1 million, a lot of money from the coffers from the state. So how do you go after these people? And most of these people have political connection. Either they are connected to the president, they are connected to someone who is connected to the president. And sometimes exposing these people is you are actually, when you are exposing them, you're actually going to expose some of the big people in the party or big people in handling public affairs. So it's become a very, very, very complicated thing. So as I said, he has to stay true to himself. What he needs to do is that he needs to fight the cause that he's there to fight. He has to investigate everyone, whether small or big. He has to just stay true to the cause. So that is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. I feel like he will do the job. He comes in with the kind of experience Nigeria needs to fight corruption. So if he is transparent and he's accountable to the people, and he gives daily briefing on what is going on in the department and the people he's going after, and I think that he's going to succeed in this job.
I like that you brought that up, Eva, because one of the reasons why he was selected for this position, because of his involvement in previous high-profile cases, including one of Alison who was oil minister between 2010 and 2015. They have been charged by the commission, and now they're seeking the extradition of that minister. So this is just one of the many other cases that he presided over that gave him the experience and the respect that he has to have that position. So hopefully he's going to keep the same energy going after big people if he has to. That remains to be seen.
Yeah, indeed. He needs to keep the same energy. I was thinking about that as well. And then you mentioned it. I was like, oh yeah, he does really need to keep the energy. And I'm going to sound skeptical, and definitely not in the spirit of skepticism, but I mean, right now it's left to be seen because his predecessor, I think that is the Bagu gentleman, I don't know how to pronounce his name, was put aside because of, misappropriation of seized assets, including selling, seized assets and evidence and things of that nature. I mean, baffling when the person who's supposed to be heading the anti-corruption coalition is himself involved in fraudulent activities. So I don't know how this is going to play out. We can only wait and see. I cannot speak to his character because I really know much about him, but I am just hoping, because that position does come with a lot of pressure. We really cannot deny that. There's going to be pressure in so many places, threats to his life, and all the shenanigans that go along with that come with the territory. So we'll wait and see. At least on my part, I'll just have to wait and see how this plays out, and then judge his past record will match up with his on the job in this particular session.
Yeah, so before I hear Peter out on this particular issue, I'd like to chime in here, raise a particular point about Mago. Because one of the things we discuss on Jacob Zuma issue is the need to strengthen institutions in Africa. And there's a lot of belief that the emergence of power, the emergence of AbdulRasheed Bawa as the EFCC chairman, despite being a very positive development, could be considered as something that actually rub off negatively on strengthening of institutions in Nigeria. Because the cases against Mago, there's not a lot of transparency in it, the prosecution. I was on the phone with a friend for about 2 hours last week, and all we discussed was Mago, because they were fully involved in the prosecution of Mago. They've requested that the government make public the findings of the inquiry, of the Salami-led commission of inquiry that probe Mago, and they're not ready to release this report at all. They said that Mago sold houses. The evidence has been refuted. The evidence that was tendered by the government has been refuted over and again and again. It was even said that Mago laundered money through his pastor, so to say, but that has also been refuted with veritable evidence. And there have been cases that also establishes that because Mago stepped on the wrong toes, including that of the incumbent Attorney General of the Federation, AbdulRasheed Malami, and that Malami wanted to get him out of his way. And he's been doing this all along because Mago has been in the wrong books of Malami. So there is this, evidence that is suggesting that the decision to do away with Mago might not necessarily based on the fact that he abused his office. Of course, he might have committed one or two wrongdoings, but this goes back to the conversation on independency of institution, strengthening of institution. If AbdulRasheed Bawa he was meant to represent, then we begin to think about the likely implication of this for the country going forward. So, Peter, what is your take on this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I really like your additional details there. Okay, there we go, Ghana. It froze there for just a moment, but you're back. Good. No, I think that's useful details. I think there needs to be obviously transparency around a lot of these cases because they are influencing and touching on sort of big personalities or political personalities, right, in the country. So at one hand, that should make you be a little bit cautious, right, in dealing with some of these cases. But at the same time, if you are too cautious at some level, then citizens will become concerned that you are going after sort of the low level sort of people engaging in corruption and not touching the high level people, right? That they're somehow that they're able to lawyer up, they're able to sort of buy their time, they're able to navigate things and get away from some of these inquiries. So obviously that's a major concern. And so I think transparency can help with that. I will say that the EFCC and just a general role in terms of transparency has tried to do a fair amount of public outreach. So if you look at their Twitter account, they're very active on Twitter. They have 1.1 million followers on Twitter. And you can see that they post some of the individuals that they are going after who are wanted for certain crimes. They also celebrate their successes. If we go down here a little bit, they celebrate some of their successes, for example, that they've been a part of. So they are being sort of outward with what they're doing, trying to communicate to the public what they're doing, right? Both in going after sort of more low-level folks, going after engaging in corruption, as well as high-level folks, which I think is good. You have to have some level of transparency there, and that can be helpful, but you have to be able to go after high and low-level folks as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That is why I want to see the action.
I want to add this transparency that we talk about when it comes to commissions that fight corruption. Really, it has to come from all fractions of the government, come from the federal side, the Congress, and independent commissions. Because when you look at EFCC over the past, let's say, 5 years during Buhari's presidency, there's this Transparency International Commission, which is a global body. It's a global commission that fights corruption in different parts of the world. So every year they publish these corruption perceptions, ranking countries according to the level of corruption, of public corruption. And over the years, Nigeria underperformed on that ranking. And so, of course, this is not entirely an indictment on EFCC, but just as a country as a whole. I mean, is how the government is supporting this work, how our Congress is supporting this work, how much resources is being put into fighting corruption. This is something that the current president of Nigeria, when he was elected, he promised to focus on fighting corruption, but these rankings and other elements are not reflecting, the kind of fight that the president promised to put into action when it comes to corruption.
Yeah, and you can see on your screen right now that is transparency.org or Transparency International. So they're sort of an international organization, non-governmental organization that comments on the level of corruption in countries. There's places to report it. And you can see right here, their rank out of 180 countries for Nigeria is 149 out of 180. And their score out of 100 on their sort of corruption's perceptions index is 25 out of 100. And just so everyone knows how this is calculated, Transparency International has a survey process. So they survey people in business, people who know about sort of the environment in the country. And those surveys are used to compile this index. And the reason why they have to use surveys to do this, as opposed to measuring corruption very directly, is that corruption is a really hidden affair, right? So it's really hard to investigate all the incidences of corruption. So Transparency International instead relies on perceptions of corruption, right? From those that have a sort of a good sense of what's going on in that area. So you can see, just as you mentioned, Gloria, that Nigeria is quite low in the ranking of countries worldwide on this on their perceptions of a Corruption Perceptions Index, or CPI.
Yeah. So what I want to add to the conversation is that with this guy that is handling this case, I think that with Nigeria, as we've said already, that when it comes to corruption, is a very complicated issue. And this new guy, what he can do is to appeal to the public, like say, buy public opinion, have the backing of the public to him for his cause, in a sense that he has to be transparent. He has to tell the public what is going on, who they are going after, the process. In that case, he's able to generate public opinion, public perception. People will start talking about it. And it kind of put pressure on the government to do more. You get it, on cases like this. So one way for him to be able to succeed in this complicated role is to appeal to the public by getting them engaged on what is going on, getting them involved. If there is a need for him to go on radio or TV, like once a week to tell them the development of issues, that would be very great. Because what we've seen over the years is that in the issue of corruption in Nigeria and everywhere on the continent is that if a big man or a minister or someone is implicated in a corrupt case, what happened in the first week, we hear a lot of information about it. The second week, then the information about the corruption charges is going down. By the time we realize it has disappeared, we have no information of how it ended, where the person is, has the person refunded the money to the state, or has the person gone to the jail. We don't hear anything about the process, about the procedure, and even the investigation that are being made. That is what happens. But if he can tell us what is going on, how they are taking the thing, where they are in each step of the way, I think he'll buy the public opinion. He will get the support of the public behind him to succeed in this role.
I think we've discussed a lot of things, and hopefully AbdulRasheed Bawa is listening to us, and there is a need for him to be trust. That's the message that is coming across to AbdulRasheed Bawa, that he needs to build trust, and he needs to strengthen the institution by ensuring that transparency is the beginning, the middle, and the last word he abides by. We wish AbdulRasheed Bawa a successful administration of the EFCC, and hopefully this is going to be a precedent that the youth can do better when given the opportunity to manage such a very sensitive and powerful institution in Africa. AbdulRasheed Bawa, do accept our best wishes from the leaders of Africa. Be assured of our support throughout your dispensation. Hopefully we can collaborate with you to do a lot of advocacy on the issue of fighting corruption and ensuring institutional transparency across all sectors in Africa. We look forward to hearing from you, AbdulRasheed Bawa. Yeah, before we move to Violet, to hear out what has been on our mind for this week. Eva, I have a very short quiz, transitional question for you. There is a particular country in Africa where it was just declared, maybe about 3-4 hours ago, that 27 members of the presidential team contacted COVID-19. Which country is this?
I'm really thinking because a lot of countries...
you might want to think of a particular country, the youngest nation in Africa.
Niger? In terms of... Are you talking in terms of age?
No, in terms of independence.
Recognition.
The youngest country.
The youngest country.
I would say South Africa.
Well, they're young in a sense, but even younger, south of Sudan.
Exactly. There you go, Peter.
South Sudan.
There you go, Peter.
With birthday being 2011.
You know,
Wow.
South Sudan
Exactly,
is a separation, you know.
Yeah,
When you say that independence, what comes to mind is that I was thinking about all these countries fighting to be liberated and things like that. But South Sudan was more like we are fed up, so let's go our way, you go away. So it's like splitting the country into two, like Somaliland, the same thing. Yeah.
So
It's getting interesting on the continent. A lot of ministers and a lot of people in public position, public servants are getting a lot of COVID, even in Ghana and places in Nigeria and everywhere. So I don't know why these big men are getting COVID.
Yeah, they said it's a big man disease in Africa. And from here we move to Violet. So Violet, what is on your mind? Hopefully it's not COVID.
Ghana, unfortunately, it is COVID. And now that you mentioned the 27 members of the presidential team of the youngest African democracy have contracted COVID, that even makes it more grim. But so African leaders across the continent are in an uproar because apparently the world is in this COVID-19 vaccine race. Meanwhile, Africa is being left behind. And actually, Cyril Ramaphosa, the head of the AU, who also happens to be the president of South Africa, did call it a nationalization of the vaccine. He said the rich countries have gone out of their way and acquired large doses from all these vaccine companies, and they have literally nationalized the vaccines and like left the African continent out of the vaccine basket. So, but what we really need to know is that Africa did have very lower cases during the first wave, but when the second wave came in, the cases began to rise, and then of course the rest of the world was rushing to try and find a vaccine. Africa again was still on the sidelines, and so when different vaccines came up like Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and now the Johnson one, of course the big dogs in the pack, like the United States and the United Kingdom, did come in and like try to secure as medicines as they could for their own populations. For countries like the UK and Canada have gone ahead to secure as much as 300% or more for their own countries. So that is even way more than they need. Meanwhile, countries on the African continent still really do not have. And so for Africa, like South Africa right now at the moment, they have acquired large doses both from Pfizer and AstraZeneca. However, the issue that they're even acquiring it at almost double the price. So currently, other countries are getting it for about $3, I think, and right now per dose. But right now, South Africa is paying about $5.25 per dose, and almost double of what other countries are paying at the moment. So what we also need to know is that I think about so I know Singapore was the first African country to, in sub-Saharan to start vaccinating its population. So, and then we did have the island of Mauritius that also did begin vaccinating its frontline workers around January 26th. And then we also did have Guinea in West Africa that ordered just 55 doses of the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine. So that shows you how little we are still doing on our part of the continent. And I don't know what the rest of the team thinks, but I am African, and not to sound non-patriotic, but I do have mixed feelings about this, because I know for a fact that when the world was racing to find vaccine, most of the African countries are on the fence, and there was a lot of bad press around the vaccine. And now that the vaccines are out and other countries, of course, I understand, yes, the value of sharing, but of course, most countries will definitely first try to cover their home bases before thinking about others. And now we are again saying that we are not being thought about, we are being left behind. And I feel like we need to take more responsibility. So I don't know if I'm being the villain here or actually playing devil's advocate, but that's really how I feel at the moment. So that's what's going on with the vaccine race at the moment.
Yeah, so there has been, we've discussed this in various editions of this week as well. So I'm curious to know, and I'm sure the viewers are curious to know this as well, that what do we think is the problem behind bad press? Is this a reflection of the state of education, or a reflection of the state of education and governance in Africa? What exactly is the major issue? Because to me, it's not about now, it's about the next pandemic. And what we possibly need to do to be better prepared, what needs to change in our educational system, what needs to change in the health infrastructure and research institute funding in Africa. Do we think these are the issues? Because if we are able to produce a vaccine on the continent, maybe it might not be difficult financing this vaccine. So I'd like to know a thought on this. Over to you, Peter.
I think that's a good point. I think one of the things that we're noticing now is that in this world that we said at one point thought was going to be globalized, interconnected, a lot of trade, we've seen worldwide some of that still continue, like the free trade agreement on the sort of within the continent of Africa. But we also see more broadly countries sort of serving themselves and also ensuring that they themselves have those capacities, a raising of trade barriers and things of this nature, right? So this was going on before the pandemic. I think in this particular instance, the pandemic has sped up perhaps those conversations that we need ways in which we take care of ourselves, right? And so Violet mentioned the Sputnik vaccine in Russia. There's also a vaccine coming out of China that China is also sharing with some African countries right now, and that's likely to increase as well. So these are all coming out of projects that were coming out of particular countries trying to take care of themselves and to invest in some of the health infrastructures that's there. So I think in moving forward, I think it's certainly important that African countries, either as a collective or some individually, provide that capacity to deal with public health crises, right? Because there is an importance to self-reliance. Now, obviously, there needs to be greater world cooperation, and that's also something we should value. But I think as a fail-safe, and knowing that countries do look out for themselves, and mass publics are expecting countries to look out for themselves, that you need to have that capacity. And I think moving forward, that capacity does not necessarily have to be done at the nation state level, right? There is a conversation ongoing on the continent about further integration in a lot of different areas. And I think the area of public health integration would be very useful, particularly because there are some countries, as Violet mentioned, that have been very skeptical of the vaccine and of COVID-19 overall, right? So one does not want to have to rely on those countries perhaps in the future to procure necessary public health goods, right? So I think as a collective and sort of the diverse voices in public health across the continent could really fund and can really get behind some of these initiatives. So that will be important, and so that they don't have to rely perhaps as much on these other programs that are there, right? COVAX is one that has been in the news. So you can see their website from the World Health Organization. So COVAX is the sort of the sub-organization and collaboration that brings together countries to help ensure that there's equitable distribution, right? And so I think moving beyond this conversation of equitable distribution, which in this present case is very important given the sort of inequities that have just been mentioned, but moving forward, as your question was, Ghana, I think one has to think about collaboration, investment in this public health infrastructure, and it's always been a challenge. Let's just be frank. This is a pandemic the world is facing now, but there are plenty of other pandemics that are ongoing on the continent of Africa, as well as elsewhere in the world, that have not received enough attention, arguably, right? And so this is a very glaring symbol of public health infrastructure that's not working, but we have public health infrastructure not working in other areas, and even the United States as well, public health infrastructure that wasn't working very well as well, with a very high death rate in COVID-19. So that's sort of my initial thoughts, at least, on that.
Eva, so back to this issue. Yeah, you've always been speaking so much about education in Africa, Eva. You're so passionate about it.
The thing is that with the issue of vaccine in Africa, I just feel like we not producing a vaccine for ourselves is a failure on our part. You have 54 countries, and are you telling me that you don't have experts to think about a vaccine for ourselves? Even a small island country like Cuba is producing its own vaccine that they are at the final stage of testing it. What is the population of Cuba compared to the entire African continent? So this is what we have to think about ourselves. Nobody, you see, they always say that Africa's problems for Africa's solution. COVID-19 is a pandemic, but we have COVID-19 in Africa, so it's an African problem. We have to start thinking about how do we solve it. When COVID started, we were doing well. We're coming out with our own test kit. So why did we fail for not producing vaccine for ourselves? Why didn't we come
Eva,
together?
let's go back to this Cuba example you just mentioned. A small country. Is it about the size or the capability, the expertise. Being a small country may not mean that you don't have the expertise. So
No,
should we
Ghana,
be talking more
the thing
about the
is,
expertise?
are you telling me that 1 billion people, we don't have expertise? We do have them. We do have Africans that are doing great things in the medical field. So are you telling me that we couldn't look out for these people, bring them together?
So Eva, there is one thing. It's about, we can be doing good things in the medical field, particularly Africans in the diaspora. But let's take a little bit step back and ask, do we have that critical medical research infrastructure necessary to produce vaccine in Africa? Because we have policymakers follow us on this week. What is the take home for them in this conversation, Eva?
Okay. 1, we have the capability, we have the human resources. And 2, if we don't even have the infrastructure, this is the time to invest in them. Because a lot of countries invested. When COVID started, countries didn't have ventilators. What did they do? They bought them from the market. They manufactured them. A lot of countries on the continent use university students to help manufacture ventilators. So even if we didn't have the infrastructure, we have the human resources, we have the experts to be able to manufacture some of these things for us to work with. And even if we didn't have the equipment, we should be able to generate the money. If we have to do donation, if countries have to come together, bringing in 10% of, like, say, their GDP, or like just 1%, even 1% of their GDP, together, put resources together for us to buy this equipment, to start thinking about producing our own vaccine, we will be able to have done it. Right now that everyone, US is thinking about themselves, Europe is thinking about itself, and all these countries are thinking about how do they sustain themselves, because they have also been hit with COVID-19, right? It's like everyone in my house is sick of malaria. Then my neighbor's son is sick of malaria. Then I go to the market. Who will I think about? I'll think about my home. How do I get the people in my home well? When my people in my home are well and there is surplus, then I give it to you, because you have to think about yourself. That is what is happening. So I don't blame the West for thinking about themselves. What I feel like, I blame Africa for not stepping up in terms of the vaccine. And even if we didn't even have let's say we didn't have the expertise, we didn't have the equipment to produce our own vaccine. When the vaccine production started and countries were lobbying to get more vaccine, giving these manufacturers, pharmaceutical organization money to produce the vaccine and getting their stake right from the onset, we should have done that. We should have lobbied from the beginning. You get it? See, nobody will fight for our problems. We have to fight for it ourselves. Yeah, people will come and help you, give you one small thing, but it's not going to help you. It's like, as I said, I have malaria. My whole household has malaria. Your neighbor has malaria. Then when I'm sick, neighbors will come. Oh, you have malaria. I'm so sorry. Here is 1 Ghana cedis. Take it and buy medicine. That is a good money, 1 Ghana cedis, but 1 Ghana cedis cannot buy the whole medicine I need to cure the people in my household. If I really want to cure the people in my household, I have to pump in most of the money, right? To care for the people in my household. So that is what we have to do. We have to start taking care of ourselves.
So
I totally agree.
Gloria, where do we put this money? Where do we pump this money? Are we pumping this money into public health research? Are we pumping this money to build that regional capacity, maybe into some research institute? Because when you look back at India is not having this crisis. They are producing vaccines in India. And the question is, if India can do it, why is it that Nigeria cannot do it? Why is it that South Africa cannot do it? Why is it that Africa as a continent cannot do it? And back to you, Gloria. What do we need to get right to be better prepared for the next pandemic? It might be next month. It might be in 2 months, because we are faced with a lot of global vulnerability that are indicative of the potential of another pandemic breaking out. How does Africa get ready not to be entrapped in this situation again, Gloria?
Yeah, I totally agree with the sentiment that you all have expressed, that we need to be thinking about our own solutions and putting resources into that. So I don't believe our issue has to do with expertise. We have highly qualified doctors, scientists, and so many have actually contributed to the creation of vaccines and medications that are being used worldwide. We have our own scientists who have come up with treatment for Ebola. The expertise is there. So what I believe we need to do in terms of resources, yes, research is very important. We need to put some of our resources into research and labs, and also into building infrastructure. Let's take the example of the COVID vaccine that we're talking about. Let's say somebody creates that vaccine. There are issues of storage, and we've heard that there's specific temperatures under which this vaccine have to be stored, and we simply don't have those facilities. There are issues having to do with logistics and transportation. These are trucks that are specifically built to transport medication and vaccines at specific temperatures. We don't have those. So the problem is not that we cannot create this. The problem, we don't have the logistics to even produce en masse and to distribute across different countries. So that's where we need to begin to start thinking how to organize ourselves in terms of increasing or building large labs that have storage capacity, that have the kind of equipment that are needed to produce this kind of medication. So I think for me, the main issue is infrastructure, logistics. And I believe very few countries in Africa have prioritized science in the way that India is. Yes, India can be, looked at as a developing country, but I can tell you, you can see it in the subject that Indian kids choose to study, in the areas, in the doctors. They have invested so much in science, more than we have. And I think this is an area in which we need to start shifting our energy and our focus. Our leaders and our politicians are always economic development, there's food insecurity, agriculture, all those are good, but we need to start thinking more about science. That's how we will grow in this area. And one last thing I wanted to mention for our viewers, I just wanted to update you. Violet mentioned Cyril Ramaphosa, President Ramaphosa, as the head of AU. Yes, he was until last week. As of this week, we have a new AU chairman, and is Felix Tshisekedi is the president of the DRC.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to jump in on something that Gloria mentioned about infrastructure and sort of like the capacities that are needed, right? Logistics in this element. I think just building on that, but going in a slightly different direction, I think we have to talk about the motivations, the real motivations for exploring a vaccine and dealing with public health concerns, right? You have to be, as a society, motivated to care about these things, right? And one of the things that we are seeing is that some of the unequal countries around the world are not doing so well with this public health crisis because they haven't had this motivation to care about things in terms of public health. They care about private health or health of certain people, right? And I think one of the barriers here to developing a vaccine and thinking about things in sort of public distribution or that broader market, the average person as part of that market and the potentials that are there, both on an economic sense and a public health sense, is that there's a high level of inequality, right? So as long as those particular people can get access to the vaccine or get access to Western medicine, things of this nature, then everything is good, right? Then there's no need to invest. So there needs to be a deeper conversation about inequity here, right? This doesn't just go for African countries, it goes for European countries, I would say Latin American countries in particular, as well as the United States, which are facing sort of different effects of this pandemic on different peoples, right? And Eva, I think Eva mentioned earlier that it's been a lot of quote unquote big men that have been getting COVID. Well, of course, we're in the news, we're going to assume that those people are getting covered more. So when they get get infected or they die. That's what's in the news. I'm sure there are others as well. But it just shows you that this pandemic is one of these great pandemics because it's influenced everyone. So from the greatest, sort of the biggest leaders of the world to the lowest leaders. And I think the world's response reflects the importance of inequality in this conversation. So I think to get right a public health system, there has to be a focus on people and dealing with broader based inequality. That's my thought, in addition to the logistics and the science component.
So to close this out, I know this is a very emotional and passionate conversation that our viewers are interested in, and just like we are also interested in this conversation. Your final thought on this issue? And that's going to be the final thought on this edition of This Week. Violet, what is your final thought on this issue? Particularly the take-home for policymakers. The take-home for policymakers that are listening to us on This Week.
I mean, myriad of things surrounding this whole thing. Before my final thoughts, let's just think about the time when, during the development of the vaccines, there was a call for Africa's contribution in terms of biological material from people, and they were saying that trying to do genetic sequencing for the virus, and trying to test and see. I don't know what the scientific terms are, but we want it would be effective on everybody, and we do not have enough samples from Africa because Africans all. So we were not even willing to contribute biological material. So, and now we are coming in the streets saying that we are being left behind, but this vaccine being mapped out, we don't even have our genetic sequences even to be effective on us. And there's also the issue of just trusting our own institutions. For example, Uganda. I know Makerere University came out with something that I'm not even sure a vaccine or a drug or something, because there's a conspiracy. And you see, you're saying that I would rather take the Chinese vaccine or no at all, but I wouldn't take the one that's being produced by Uganda or by Makerere University. And to them, they were saying that the only way that they could take that vaccine/drug is if the government officials were vaccinated, beginning with the president, and then if they die, they have faith to do it. So that just shows you that we are not even willing to look at homegrown solutions. We would rather die than trust what we produce. And that is sad. It is really sad. Yeah. So I think if I were to address the policies, I think this would go back to fundamentally looking at our leadership. One, we need to create trust in our own systems. And if our leaders are shady, there's no way we are going to trust what they bring to us, because people think that our leaders are going to go and take the Pfizer vaccine and the AstraZeneca ones, and then they will give us, the homegrown solution. Everybody's also giving the side eye like, no. So I think that it goes back to influencing citizens with the kind of leadership that we provide or that they provide. And then two, education, changing attitudes surrounding certain things and tackling the superstitions that, we've carried forward for so many generations. I understand that Africa has been exploited, so it's time that we change in the way we think about so many other things, because it comes back to hurt us. A case in point is this one. And like I said, there's going to be other pandemics going forward. So are we always going to keep on the fence? And then, of course, our investing in research and development and institutions, like everyone has said, but all this goes back to the kind of leadership that we have. It starts with political will. If we don't have, there's no way we're going to progress to all the other solutions that have been suggested by my colleagues. So if I were to ask the policymakers, it starts with leadership and political will, the quality.
So thank you so much, all of you, for contributing to this week, to this edition of This Week. We discussed a number of very important issues, bringing out a lot of policy insight for policymakers that have been following us. and we discuss the need for us to strengthen institutions in Africa. When we look at the issue of Jacob Zuma, it's a corruption prosecution case. And we also established the need for that in Nigeria as well when we discuss the emergence of AbdulRasheed Bawa as the EFCC's chairman. And the same team also came up in our conversation on the issue of COVID-19. Likewise, the need for Africa to put more money to support the funding of research, the funding of public aid, and to make it a priority issue on the continent. It is on this note, viewers, that we are going to be calling it a day today on this edition of This Week. We want to thank you for joining us today live or after the event. We'll see you again in 2 weeks for this week. In the meantime, hit that subscribe button to subscribe to the Leaders of Africa YouTube channel. And we also implore you to join our Discord community for conversation on future program alert. And do follow the Leaders of Africa on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. That's it for today. On This Week, we'll be glad to meet with you in a fortnight. Thank you and bye.
Bye.
Bye.